Started Cumberland. It's about 40 minutes now. O'Hare to downtown, outbound 39. Eden's tight Pratt to the junction. That's about a 3 or 4 minute delay. Inbound Eisenhower. The heavy stuff starts before Manheim. It's 45 minutes, 390 to downtown. Stevenson, 52 minutes, 355 to Lakeshore Drive. Ryan, 24 minutes, 95 to downtown. I-57, 21 minutes, I-80 to the Merge, Bishop Ford 19, southbound Lakeshore Drive, and stop and go, Irving Park to Fullerton. Northbound Tri-State, it's congested from the Stevenson to the Hinsdale Oasis, then slow from the Reagan Tollway to North Avenue. It's about Reagan Tollway, there's a delay around Eel, and then it's heavy 53 Highland, northbound Veterans Memorial, 75th to Ogden. That's traffic. I'm Jim Telemonte on AM 560, The Answer.
Chicago's Morning Answer continues next. Your official Chicagoland weather forecast from the 1 Hour Heating and Air Conditioning Weather Center. We'll have clouds today, a high of 36, and a cloudy overnight, a low of 29. Currently 29. Next news at 8. Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
This hourly segment is brought to you by Papa Nicholas Coffee. Papa Nicholas Coffee, a family tradition since 1897.
If you're looking for the latest news, insight into what it means, and the sharpest opinion, there's only one station in Chicago where you can turn, and it's this one. We're AM 560, The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. I thought this was an interesting remark on Fareed Zakaria's show over the weekend. The editor of The Economist magazine, Zanny Mitten-Beddoes, was asked, she was in Davos, as was Zakaria, and was asked, how much impeachment talk was there in Davos? All these world leaders getting together, listening to President Trump tout America's success under his presidency, economic success. Were people kibitzing about the impeachment of the president and what that may mean for America and its global leadership after 2020.
What is your sense of what they're making of this impeachment?
To be honest, I don't think they're paying a huge amount of attention to it. I think because, as you say, the outcome is all but foregone, they are moving beyond that. And I was struck not only how little attention was being paid to the impeachment trial, but quite how many people seemed to be taking almost as given that there might be a second term for President Trump. So the mood, I think, certainly amongst the business types in Davos was, get ready for a second term. And literally no one spoke to me about impeachment.
Oh, boy. That's not good news to the ears of the left in this country. I guess probably, though, that's easily explained away. They were mesmerized by Greta Thunberg and her pronouncements about end days. I mean, who cares, second term or no second term, when if we don't act, a generation ago, according to Greta, then it's all going to be for naught. For more on this topic, somebody who's written about it a bit, responding to a grown-up version of Greta, Paul Krugman, a Nobel Prize winner, but I'm sure Greta will be one soon enough. We're pleased to be joined by David Simon, who's a fellow at the Washington-based Committee to Unleash Prosperity and also a practicing lawyer in Chicago. David, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good morning.
Good morning. So you zeroed in on some of the pronouncements over the last couple of decades about end days, and you find that even if you've got a Nobel Prize in economics in your trophy case, it doesn't make your predictions past or present correct.
That's exactly right. For decades, for as long as people have been making predictions about the future of the world, they often make them based on pure speculation, not based on facts. Partly because facts aren't as exciting, and it's harder to get a bunch of people to follow you if you're not saying that the world's going to end. Please go do what I say. But the facts about global warming. Well, first, the predictions about global warming have been going on for decades. They've been saying that coastal cities will be underwater, and that all kinds of dramatic things will happen that, going forward, will prevent people from living longer, more prosperous, healthier lives around the world. And the facts simply don't back that up. It's like saying because it snowed it's snowing today, that there's an inch of snow today, that tomorrow there'll be 2 inches, and it'll keep growing, and 10 years from now it'll be 10 inches a day, and eventually it'll be, we'll be living under snow every day of our lives. It's just not true. If you look at the facts, for example, 17 times as many people around the world die from colder temperatures than from warmer temperatures. So as the climate gets warmer, if anything, more people are alive. That is in of itself a huge triumph and a benefit of global warming rather than a problem with global warming. I'm not saying we're not having some global warming, but the amount of global warming we've had. NASA has a very good data set for going back to about 1880. It's been about 1 degree centigrade, just a little over 1 degree centigrade in that whole time, almost 140 years. At that pace, we won't get the kind of warming that all these forecasts are based on. They're talking about another 3 degrees centigrade by 2100. That, based on the pace we've gone, that would take another several hundred years. Another great example is that over the last 100 years, the number of people around the world who die from climate-related catastrophes, hurricanes, tornadoes, things like that, it's down over 80% during a time that the world's population has almost quadrupled. So we've gone from about 2 billion people in around 1920 to about 7.5 billion people now, yet the number of people who are dying from these terrible catastrophes is way, 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 way down.
Well,
and that's at a time when the temperature's been rising.
Well, what assertions did Paul Krugman make?
Well, Krugman most recently made his assertion, I'll pull it up for you right now, that I believe Florida will be underwater fairly soon. Let's see what he says. Now, he's very vague because he doesn't want to get pinned down, I'm sure, but he says, let's see, what does he say here? He says that on our current trajectory, Florida as a whole, that's the whole state, will eventually be swallowed by the sea, and much of India will eventually become uninhabitable. Now, I remind you that these are the same kinds of people who in the 60s and 70s were saying that that overpopulation would lead hundreds of millions of people to die of famine. Never happened. They said around the same time that we were going to run out of oil. Quite the opposite. The world's problems these days, as far as farmers are concerned, for example, is that we have too much food, and China recently, one of their big economic agencies just declared recently that one of the biggest problems is they have too few people because of their one-child policy for so long. They now have so many old people and far, far too few people, not enough people to work and to build and to invest and do all these other things.
Well, right, and even though I think it's NASA data that has us the global temperature increasing about 1 degree Fahrenheit over the last 30 years, it turns out that the average normal human body temperature is lower by 1 degree Fahrenheit these days, and so hey, it's a wash.
Exactly.
I mean, it's just all of this stuff, this divining from models that turn out not to be true, and then the response inevitably to you just sort of alluded to Paul Ehrlich's 1968 book, The Population Bomb, which was a dud. Now the argument is, and the same thing with Al Gore's apocalyptic predictions and everybody else's, well, their predictions are right. They just that their timeline was wrong. So now it's starting to come true. And now we're on a 20 or 30 year or 12 year, according to AOC, horizon to either do something or perish from the universe. They're always sort of recasting when the apocalypse is going to come, but make no mistake, it's going to come.
That is always the line, and it's a line that is impossible to say is absolutely 100% impossible. But all we can do, the best source of information about what the future will be is always to look at what has happened in the past and for as long as possible, not to cherry pick from 1 year. For example, from 2017 to 2016, the temperature around the world went down again in 2018. It went up a bit again in 2019, not quite to where it was in 2016, but if you just look at 1 year, you can say, judging from this 1 year, if it goes up like this the next 100 years, it'll be much higher. But you have to look at the whole sweep of history, as much data as you can, to get a good sense of of what is likely to happen. If you look at what the temperature just was like yesterday and guess that will be like that for the next 100 years, it's probably not a very good gauge. You want to look at as much data as you can, as many facts as you can. But you can always make predictions about that are scary, and if they're exciting and well put together, you will get people to believe it. But that doesn't make them true, and doesn't make them likely to turn out that way. Just the opposite.
You also point out something that the left doesn't like to point out, or the alarmists don't like to point out, which is that actually innovation in our industrial economies, in the West in particular, has led to a reduction in pollution. So we don't need to deindustrialize to reduce pollution. We can innovate to reduce pollution.
You're exactly right. A couple of key points on that. Since 1990, for example, the number of people dying from air pollution is down over 50% around the world. That's a huge triumph, and that's coming largely from, is exactly what you say, innovations in using better technology, for example, using more natural gas instead of coal. Not because of some government rule saying we need to use natural gas instead of coal, but simply because natural gas is so plentiful. It's become so much, we found so much of it through fracking and new technologies. It's so much cheaper. You go with the least expensive thing, which in this case also has turned out to be much, much cleaner. And in fact, the United States, its emissions of greenhouse gases are basically flat or been falling over the last 10, 15 years. The countries where they're going up are places like China and India, and they're going up largely because they are way behind technologically for how most of their people, how their power plants work, and how most of their people heat their homes and things like that.
He is David Simon. He's a fellow at the Washington-based Committee to Unleash Prosperity and a lawyer in Chicago. Check out his piece, which I'll tweet out. Paul Krugman is a global warming alarmist. Don't be